Well, Happy New Year. Good to see everybody. We're here in Barrie. Can we put our hands together, welcome Aurelia and Midland and everyone watch online this morning? Yeah. Happy New Year, everybody. So great to see you. And if you're here and it's your first time here, thanks for taking a chance on us. Maybe you came on Christmas Eve and you came back. So glad that you're here with us this morning. And I want to begin today by saying thank you to you. At the beginning of December, at all our locations, I challenged you. I said, hey, let's not coast into the end of the year. Let's finish the year strong. And as you heard at all our locations, we had record attendance for Christmas Eve at all locations this year, and which was incredible. You got in the corner of the food bank with food in December, women in need in our communities in December in a huge way. And then on Christmas Eve, as you heard this morning, we were able to give a financial gift because of your year-end giving and those who gave on that evening to our local partners at each location, the Barrie Food Bank, and then the Lighthouse in Aurelia, and the Salvation Army in Midland. And somebody was asking me, in total, what is that we were able to give to all those incredible organizations who are for our community? And I want to write it down because I want to get right to the cent, you know? So $53,859.30. Isn't that crazy? Unbelievable. And they do such great things to be for our community, and we want to get in their corner, and we've been able to do that. And then in addition to that, we want to create environments where we can be for people, where we can invite people to come and discover who Jesus is. And so that's been amazing to see. But we don't want to just finish the year strong. We want to start the year strong. And this new series with Carrie next week, I'd be encouraging you to be thinking about who you can bring with you. You could say, hey, you're going to get a free book. Come get your free book. And you want to get that as a gift. It's going to be an incredible tool for you. And not only do I think that 3-week series is going to be a great part of beginning the journey for so many people, including us, but I think it's going to begin a really great conversation within our church about how God's made you, how He's wired you, and why He's made you. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from Carrie. So you can practice in the mirror. Hey, do you want to join me for a 3-week series? Just like that. And then and have as many people come with you as possible. It's going to be a great series for us. And I want to begin this morning. I want to talk about you and about starting your year strong. And what would it mean for you to start 2020 strong? And I want to begin telling you about a friend of mine. I have a friend. I call him Mo. His name's actually David Morrison, but we call him Mo. And his wife's name's Joanna, and we call her Joe, Mo and Joe. See, it's simple. And Mo is a guy who mentored me for a number of years of my life. He's a good friend of mine. And Mo is the kind of person who always impressed me with his faith. It was actually, Mo had the ability, one of these people who had the ability to kind of see what God was doing in your life. And Mo was the person who initially planted the idea in my mind, hey, Jeff, I know that you're a high school teacher, but have you ever thought about going into full-time ministry? And Mo is the person who began that prayer journey for me, that led me into ministry, that led me partially to where I am today, and has been an incredible influence on my life. And I actually was able to work with him on a team for a number of years. And I was impressed with how he prayed, and I was impressed with how he read Scripture, and I was impressed with how he conducted himself, his character. I was impressed with how he led us as a team. Spiritually, he was the kind of person I looked up to, and I thought, man, I could never have a faith like Mo. I could never have the spiritual fortitude that he has. I could just never be as spiritual as that person. He's just incredible to see. And then, as if that wasn't impressive enough, one day he walks into a room that I'm in, and he says, I need to talk to you. And I said, sure. And he said, Mo and I have been praying, and we feel like God is asking us to take our 3 little kids and move to rural Malawi, Africa, and rescue AIDS orphans. And I thought, man, how much more spiritual can this guy get? I mean, how do you have a faith that big? And then he shows me the picture of where he's going, and it's like rural Malawi, like there's a hydro pole and nothing. And it's amazing to see what God has done through their faith, through their ability to step out, where they rescue AIDS orphans from across rural Malawi. They have a seminary there. They have a feeding program. They do such incredible work. They have 50 local Malawian employees. It's amazing to see what God has done. And when I look at Mo's life, I think to myself, I could never have a faith that big. I could never have a faith that big. And if you're here today and you would call yourself a follower of Jesus, odds are there's someone in your life that you think of the same way. You think, man, that person just has a big faith. Wow, that person is just way more spiritual than I could ever be. I mean, I could never do what that person has done. And even if you're here and you would say, well, I'm kind of new to the whole faith thing. I'm still on a journey when it comes to faith. Maybe the person invited you is that person, where you looked at their life and said, man, there's something about their faith. There's something different about them. In fact, some people have people they look up to who are so well known, like someone like Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King, where they'll say, man, I could never have the faith that they had. And we can see that faith and think, man, my faith is so small. In fact, I would say what often happens to us when it comes to our own faith, our discouragement sometimes can come in two forms. One form is we're too overwhelmed to think of our faith. Well, I don't have big faith because I'm too busy. I got to get the kids to hockey, or I got to get to my meetings, I got to get to my appointments, I got to get dinner on the table. I'm so overwhelmed with life, I don't really have a lot of time to think about my faith. And then on the flip side of that, where I think we get trapped, is on the flip side of that, we get underwhelmed by our faith. When we do have a moment to think about our faith, when we do have a moment to reflect on our faith, we often think, man, my faith isn't very big. I don't really feel like my spiritual life is as deep as I would like it to be. And then we get overwhelmed with life again, and we don't have time to think about it. And then when we get a moment to think about it, we're underwhelmed with our life. And it kind of goes in a circular pattern for many of us. And so what we decide to do at times of the year like this is we resolve that we're going to change that, and by making a resolution. And we say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a resolution that I'm going to read my Bible more. And I'm going to read my Bible more, and I'm going to get up early, and I'm going to read my Bible, or I'm going to read before I go to bed, or make a resolution that we're going to pray more. And the truth is, those things do help grow our faith a little bit. But then life gets overwhelming again. Often the resolution disappears. And we think, oh, I haven't prayed in a while. Oh, I haven't read my Bible in a while. And we start to feel discouraged again. And we feel like we're back where we were. How do you grow big faith? How do you have a faith that's bigger than you? Where does that actually come from? The faith of the people that impresses you. How do you have that kind of faith? And what if there was a catalyst to having faith that's bigger than you? What if there is a way where you could quickly grow your faith? What would that actually be? And I want to look at that this morning, and I want to look at the account of two accounts, actually, of the disciples with Jesus. Two very, actually, similar accounts, but different in really important ways. And we're going to look at the lives of the disciples, particularly Peter. We're going to look at Jesus. We're going to look at how they interacted in these two passages. And we're going to find out a way that you can grow big faith more quickly. And we're going to start by looking at Matthew chapter 8. Now, I want to let you know before we read this, that in this passage, the disciples have been with Jesus for a little while. They've been following him not too long. They've seen him do some miracles one-on-one with people. Healing people, mostly healing people who are sick. He turned water into wine, which is a cool trick, and not a trick, but a cool miracle. And then in turn, he's healing people, and they're going, okay, this is pretty impressive. And then this happens to them in Matthew chapter 8. And this is what it says. Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with the disciples. So I happen to have a boat here today. It wasn't a Zodiac probably, but we get the idea. So I'll get in the boat. It says, then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. And suddenly a fierce storm struck the lake, with waves breaking into the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. So this is interesting. They're in a storm. They're panicked about it. Some of them are actually experienced fishermen, and they're worried about it. So you know it's bad. And Jesus is fast asleep. And so when they panic, the disciples went and they woke him shouting, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." Right? Let's look for the leader. Okay, Jesus, you're the leader. Where are you? Oh, you're sleeping? Okay. Well, let's wake him up. Jesus, we're going to drown. We're going to drown. Now, this is interesting to me because Jesus responds and he doesn't even get up. You know, I've got a teenager at my house. I don't know if you've ever had one at your house, but it's kind of like that. I picture him kind of looking up with just one eye. You know, it doesn't even open the other eye. And the storm's still going on. And he says, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." And I think it has an exclamation mark on it because the storm is so loud, he had to yell it. He says, "You have so little faith." Then he got up, he rebukes the wind and the waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. And the disciples were amazed. "Who is this man?" they asked. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, what's interesting about this passage is that for the disciples, they're so amazed. And the reason they're amazed is they've seen Jesus healing people one-on-one. They've seen Jesus turn water into wine. But now they see Jesus having power over all of nature. And for them, this is like, okay, this is like a whole other level. Like this isn't just one-on-one. This is him calming an entire storm. This is Jesus having control over what's happening in the world around us. He can change our circumstance. And traditionally, the way that, and I think rightfully so, Christians have looked at this passage metaphorically and have said, hey, this is a metaphor partially for our lives. It's a true account, but also a metaphor for the fact that Jesus is present with us in our storms. That Jesus is with us in our storms. No matter how little our faith is, he's present with us. And I think that that's true. But to me, this story, this original story in chapter 8 of Jesus with the disciples, where he calms the storm, really for them is faith 1.0 for them. This is really account 1.0 for them. Because they have another experience in a storm with Jesus, and it's different in many ways. See, what happens is, after this happens in chapter 8, he calms the storm. They continue to journey with Jesus. He's healing people some more. And then what happens, he's preaching, the crowds are getting bigger, and then he feeds 5,000 people with a handful of bread and fish. And, this is blowing their mind. So now they know Jesus much better than they did the first time they were in a storm. And there's a second account of Jesus with the disciples in the storm. And this one is really, in some ways, very different. And I think it's important for us as we try to understand, what does it mean to have a faith that's bigger than us? And this is what it says in Matthew 14. It says, immediately after this, Jesus insisted that so this is after this miracle of feeding 5,000, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake, while he sent the people home. And sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. And night fell while he was there all alone. So what's interesting in this account is the disciples are in the boat. They're in this boat, but Jesus isn't there this time. He actually sends them on their own. And he goes up to the mountainside to pray. Now, why does he go to the mountainside to pray? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is, some people would say he just needed some rest. Another reason is his friend John the Baptist was just beheaded for telling people about the coming of the Messiah, of Jesus. So he's grieving the loss of a friend. But I think he's also on the mountainside praying because he just sent the disciples into a storm alone in the boat. Now, for some of you, this does something really wacky with your theology, that Jesus would send them into the storm. And there's a whole other conversation, a whole other sermon here about how God leverages difficult circumstances that we're not going to get to today. But it's important to acknowledge that that's true. He sends them knowingly into the storm. And it says, meanwhile, while he's praying, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. Now, here they are, the disciples. They're in their boat. They're in the storm again. This time, no Jesus. There's no Jesus to wake up. This time, they're on their own in the storm. And Jesus comes walking to them on the water. And this is their response. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. And in their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." They're in the boat, they're looking out in the distance, and somebody says, "Is that Jesus out there? Is that Jesus coming my way? Is that Jesus coming our way?" And then they're terrified. Maybe it's a ghost that's coming our way. I think it's interesting in our lives that when Jesus shows up in our lives, often our immediate response is fear. Often at first, we're thinking, I'm not sure if that's Jesus. I remember when I originally came to Connexus, what happened was I was working in Oakville, working at a church that I loved for 7 years, and I started to get a burden to create churches that unchurched people love to attend. And that's our vision here. And what happened was I started to Google. I heard there was a church in Barrie, Aurelia, Oro. I'd never heard of Oro. And I typed it in, I Googled it, and I found this Connexus church, and I clicked on a tab that said employment opportunities. And then it opened up. There was one opportunity, and it was for student ministry, which was what I was looking for at the time. And I remember when that happened, the feeling of fear that I had. Jesus, is this you telling me that I should apply for this job? I didn't feel excited. I felt afraid. I like my life. Right? I got a nice house. I got a beautiful wife. She's still beautiful. I got 2 kids, right? And one of them is a brand new baby. And for me, it's like, Jesus, is this you? I'm not feeling excited. I'm feeling afraid. I'm not sure I'm up for this change. I'm not sure I'm up for a new challenge. I'm not sure I want to disrupt my life. I'm not sure I want to take this step. And I think as we head into 2020, I think that one of the questions I want to ask you today is, what is Jesus saying to you? Where in your life is Jesus coming to you? About your job situation, about the relationships that you're in, about the opportunities that are in front of you, about the hard conversations you need to have. And often when Jesus comes, you can immediately be afraid. And when we're afraid, we run. But you can't run when you're in the boat, in this case. And what happened is night fell. Sorry, I lost my spot. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water, and they were terrified. It's a ghost. But Jesus spoke to them at once, and he said, "Don't be afraid. Have courage. I'm here." Don't be afraid. Have courage. I'm here. He's saying, hey, I'm present. Hey, when you're afraid as I approach you, I'm present. It's me. I'm here. Now, my immediate thought would be, if you're the disciples and you're in this boat and you see Jesus and you realize it's him on the water and you're in the storm and he says, don't be afraid. If you were back in Matthew 8 and you saw that happen, my thought would be, your response should be, Jesus, that's you? Come get in the boat and calm the storm like you did in chapter 8. Come get in the storm and stop this like you did in chapter 8. But that isn't what happens. In Faith 2.0, in the second version, you see Peter respond in a completely different way. It says, then Peter called to him and said, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water. Jesus, if that's you out there, after all I've seen, tell me it's you. I'm going to walk on the water. I want to do what you're doing. I want to see what you're seeing. I want to be a part of what's happening here. And what happens is, Jesus says, yes, come. And it says, Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. And I can't imagine what that was like. I don't know if he took his shoes off or not. I'm going to leave mine on today. But what happened was, you think he first put his foot over, and what that must have been like to feel like, is it going to be firm or am I just going to fall right in? And then another step. And then another step. And as Peter is taking step by step by step, his faith is getting bigger and bigger and bigger because he decided to get out of the boat. And I think the question for all of us in 2020 is, in what area of our life is Jesus asking us to get out of the boat? In what area of life? Maybe it's you've never started that business and you know at the end of the day that God has called you to take a chance and start it. That maybe Jesus is calling you to start a relationship. Maybe Jesus is calling you to end a relationship. I like having a boyfriend, but I know he's not the one. And maybe he's asking you to get out the boat and have that conversation. Maybe for you, financially, he's saying, hey, get out of the boat and trust me. Trust me. It's time to get your finances in order. Make the hard decisions that you need to make in order to get out of the debt that you're into. Or maybe financially he's saying, hey, you need to downsize your life so you can choose to be more generous. Where is he asking you to get out of the boat in 2020? Because here's the thing. Resolutions will grow your faith a little bit. But risking with Jesus will grow a faith that's bigger than you. Because you see, here's what happens. When you step out of the boat, all of a sudden, when you're stepping out of the boat to the thing that Jesus has called you to, the pages of this book come alive. Your prayer life comes alive. I think sometimes when it comes to those of us who are Christ followers, it's like being at the Grand Canyon and staying in your car and reading facts about the Grand Canyon on your phone. And somebody's banging on the window going, the Grand Canyon's right over there. Why don't you go see the Grand Canyon? Because if you want to read about it now, wait till you actually see it. Then you're going to want to read about the Grand Canyon. But I think sometimes we would say, you know what, I'm just going to stay in the boat. I'll read my Bible, and I'll pray, and I'll make a resolution, and I'll try to stay motivated to get out every day, to read every day. I'm going to stay motivated to read every day. And you'll read every day when you step out of the boat. You'll be praying every day when you step out of the boat. I ended up applying for that position at Connexus, and they were crazy enough to hire me. And what happened was, my wife, Leslie, and I, we decided we would get prepared to come to Connexus, and we wanted to be financially wise about it, like any of you would. And so we looked at, housing prices, and just to make sure financially everything was fine, and it was going to be fine for us to move to Barrie, and so we're excited about that, and Carter was a brand new baby then. And we had a number of people come through our house. It looked like in the first 5 days, we were going to get into a bidding war, which is exciting if you're selling, and if you're buying, it's not quite as exciting. But the year that we moved was 2008. And 5 days into our house being on the market crashed. And then nobody wanted to see our house. Nobody wanted to see anybody's house. Well, they all wanted to look, but there are lots of tire kickers out there. And then I thought, this doesn't seem quite as exciting anymore. See, when you get out of the boat, what happens is you start to pray more. I prayed more than I ever prayed. And I read Scripture more than I ever read it. Because here's what happens to Peter in the passage. It says, Peter went over the side of the boat in the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. And Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. What happened to Peter is as he got out of the boat and he got closer and closer to Jesus and further away from the boat, all of a sudden his face started to wobble. All of a sudden, it was hard to keep his eyes fixed on Jesus because he started to see the things around him. That's what happened to me. When we get out of the boat, at first the faith is growing. Man, this is so exciting. And then our face starts to wobble. Oh no, I can't believe this is happening with the housing market at this time. So then I was commuting back and forth for 3 months. Then we couldn't find a house here. And at one point we contemplated, I remember the 23rd of December, having a discussion about putting all our stuff in storage and moving my wife to Ottawa while I worked here. None of this was what we had pictured. And my faith began to wobble. And then in the midst of that, I got kidney stones, which is a whole other sermon in itself. Pain and suffering sermon. We'll save that for later. And my faith began to wobble. And when you step out of the boat, your faith begins to wobble. That's going to happen. But then Jesus reaches out and grabs Peter and pulls him up. And his eyes again are fixed on Jesus, locked on Jesus, because all he has there is Jesus. Because the boat now is way, way too far away. He's burned the boat. But his faith continues to grow. And this is what I think, why you have to look at these two passages together. Because this is what Jesus says to Peter. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. He said, "You have so little faith. Why did you doubt me?" See, here's the thing. The difference between my friend Mo and me is not that he has big faith and that I have little faith. It's just that he's taking his little faith and getting out of the boat. In both cases, they had little faith. He didn't say, "Peter, you got out of the boat. You've got such big faith now." We all have little faith. It's what we do with that little bit of faith. It's about our willingness to say, I'm going to take a step outside of the boat. I'm going to take a step out and see what God does. Jesus, is that you calling me? Because if that's you calling me, I'm ready to get out of the boat. I'm going to try to get out of the boat. And I'm afraid, but I'm ready to try. And I know my faith's going to wobble, but at the end of the day, I know my faith is going to be bigger than me. And taking that risk will be bigger than any resolution you can make. And then at the end, I love this part at the end. It says, when they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. And the disciples worshiped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. You really are the Son of God. Here's what I think is between the lines of that. Jesus is in the boat. The disciples are in the boat. The storm has calmed. They're all worshiping him. I don't know if they're praying. I don't know if they're singing to him. I don't know what they're doing to worship him. But here's what I know. There's one person in that boat who's worshiping with a bigger heart than everybody else. And that's Peter. Because they all stayed in the boat. But he experienced something none of them experienced. He saw something none of them saw. He had an encounter with the Son of God that none of them had because he was willing to get out of the boat. See, when we come here on a Sunday morning and we sing about how great God is, the people who are out of the boat are singing in a totally different way. Because they understand what it is to have their eyes fixed on Jesus, because that's all there is. And we worship in a different way. We encounter God in a different way when we decide to get out of the boat. You see, resolutions are going to help your faith grow a little bit. But risking with Jesus will grow a faith that's bigger than you. And so the question this morning that you can't leave here without asking yourself is, where is God asking me to get out of the boat in 2020? Where is God asking you to get out of the boat in 2020? Now, you might not know the answer. Some of you are like, I already know. I already know. You know, and if you already know and your spouse doesn't, this is when it is appropriate to give them an elbow. Just say, hey, I already know. And some of you are saying, I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea. And if you don't have any idea, I would encourage you to pray about it. Because for some of you, this is about a career change. For some of you, this is about getting out of your boat when it comes to your parenting. For some of you, this is about getting out of the boat when it comes to a relationship that you need to begin, that you need to end. For some of you, this is getting out of the boat financially. I'll be honest. For Leslie and I, getting out of the boat has at times been financial. I remember the first time we gave a check to the mission of Connexus, and I was so concerned that we weren't going to have the money on the other side. That's what God called us to at that time in our lives, to get out of the boat in that way. Maybe he's asking you to get out of the boat when it comes to being a part of a small group. Community groups, our small groups are kicking off this new year, and you're saying, I've always been afraid to jump into community, and this is the year for you to do that. Maybe for you it's baptism. We've got a baptism Sunday coming in March, and you know that Jesus is calling you to be baptized. He's clear about it in Scripture. And maybe you were baptized as a baby. Maybe you made some sort of profession of faith in your teenage life, and those are important things, but it doesn't make baptism any less important. Let's say, hey, publicly, I've chosen to follow Jesus. Maybe that's where Jesus is calling you to get out of the boat. Maybe it's volunteering somewhere at Connexus, getting out of the boat that way. Maybe it's getting to know your neighbors. Maybe it's inviting someone to the coming series. When we look at what God did on Christmas Eve at Connexus, that's because people decided to get out of the boat and invite someone who Jesus called them to invite. Where is he asking you to get out of the boat? And the reason I want to bring this question to you this morning is because at the end of 2020, I want you to be able to say, man, this was the year I fixed my eyes on Jesus. This was the year my faith grew bigger than me. What if at the end of 2020 you could say that? Man, when it comes to faith, 2020 was a year. My faith was bigger than it could ever be. And I understand it's a dangerous, courageous prayer to say, Jesus, where are you calling me out of the boat? I was just talking to someone a few weeks ago at another one of our locations, and where's God calling them out of the boat? God's called us to be foster parents. It's a pretty big commitment. You don't know what Jesus is going to call you to. But I can promise you that when you fix your eyes on him, he will meet you on the other side, even after you wobble a little bit. Because he's bigger than the storm. And 2020 could be the year you worship him like never before. That you prayed like never before. You sang like never before. You changed like never before. And so this is what I'm going to encourage you to do today. Is if you're here today and you're not sure where Jesus is calling you to get out of the boat, and you're married, I would encourage you not to go decide this on your own. I speak from my own marriage mistakes. You need to pray together about, Jesus, in 2020, where are you calling us to get out of the boat? I believe he'll speak to you if you don't know. If you're here today and you're single, for you, the opportunity to pray and come to God and say, where are you calling me to get out of the boat? Where do you want to grow my faith that's bigger than me? Something I can't control on my own. What is that area for me? And then today, we gave you this lifesaver. So the suspense will end now. Today we gave you this lifesaver because we couldn't find candy that was shaped like boats. And what I want you to do is I want you to keep this, and when you know how Jesus is calling you to get out of the boat in 2020, that's when I want you to eat this. I want you to burn the boat. Believe me, this is not like communion or anything like that. But it is symbolic. And I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing, and maybe you already know, you're going to take that lifesaver, and you're going to say, okay, I know what it is, I'm going to take it now. Maybe you're going to take it home. Maybe you're going to put it on your dresser, and you're going to pray for the next month. And say, Jesus, show me where. I'm ready. I'm ready to step out of the boat. I just need you to show me where. And when he shows you, you will be afraid. You will say, Jesus, is that you? That sounds too scary. But then when you step out of that boat, your faith will grow step by step. And you'll wobble the further you get from the boat. But Jesus will meet you there. And you will have a faith that's bigger than you. And the difference between you and the person that you admire when it comes to their faith isn't that they have more faith than you. It's that they're willing to take their little bit of faith, the same little faith that you have, and get out of the boat. Man, what if 2020 was the year all of us said, man, this is the year all of us as a church just locked our eyes on Jesus and stepped out of the boat? What might God do in our lives? What stories might we tell each other about a faith and a God that's bigger than us? I'm going to pray that Jesus would speak to you through his Spirit. Then the band's going to come out, and then we're going to close from there. Let's pray together. God, I come to you today, and I just want to lift up to you people at all of our locations who are asking the question, who are brave enough to ask the question, Jesus, where are you asking me to get out of the boat? I want to grow a faith that's bigger than me. I pray that your Spirit would be speaking to them now, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, that they would know where you're calling them to get out of the boat. And God, I know there are people here this morning who don't know you, who are just exploring faith, and we're so glad that they're here. And maybe the step for them is just exploring what faith in Jesus is. And I pray, if that's them, that you would speak to them this morning. Those who you're speaking to about baptism, those who you're speaking to about getting in community, making financial decisions, making a business move, ending a relationship, starting a relationship, whatever it might be, God, I pray that you would be clear through your Spirit as to where you're calling them to be. And that you would give us the courage to get out of the boat, knowing there's nothing better than having our eyes fixed on you. And I pray all of this in your name.